Hello, and welcome to week number 4. This week we will begin reading literature from the postmodern period. So basically, we're starting off with looking at literature post 1945. Now, as you read this week about the social historical context of the authors that you'll be reading, you'll notice that there are some major changes that took place in American culture. In terms of the literary environment, when we think about the writers from the modernist period, we want to think that the writers, even though they had an understanding of different points of view, they were still trying to find this objective truth or this unified theory or unified interpretation to understanding American identity. Well, one of the major differences between the modern and the postmodern writers was that the postmodern writers challenged this idea of this unified truth. So it was much more of this pursuit of subjectivity rather than objectivity. So, for instance, when we think about this idea of what it means to be an American, how do we define or what do we include in the literary canon? All this concept of what it means to be an American and this idea of truth is extremely fragmented. We have to take in consideration the cultural background. We have to take in consideration the age. We have to take in consideration the class. We have to take in consideration gender. And so now what's happening in the postmodern period is that when we think about ideas of conceptualization of literature, conceptualization of literary identity. We're always paying attention to the outside social, historical, economic factors that may influence how that person might perceive their particular culture. So that's what I want you to keep in mind as you're reading the literature over this week. This week you're going to be reading work from Theodore Roethke, Toni Morrison, and Flannery O'Connor. I'm also going to upload a short video on postmodernism that'll sort of demystify what your book is talking about in regards to postmodernism. And in this video, they talk about how postmodernism sort of conflicts or reacts to modernism that precedes it. Another thing that I want you to be aware of for this week, and I'm just pulling up the assignment sheet so that I do not miss anything. Like I said before, you'll be reading literature from Theodore Roethke, Flannery O'Connor, and Toni Morrison. I've also uploaded the assignment sheet for paper number 3. Now, the assignment sheet for paper number 3 will be in the content section of e-learning, and your paper number 3 will be a literary analysis paper. So when you think about the literary analysis paper, you want to think about, you're basically extending a lot of the ideas that you've had in your new critical essay, except you're not so bound to just focusing on literary devices. So when we think of the literary analysis, you want to examine how concepts and forms of literature relate to larger political, social, aesthetic, and religious aspects of a particular culture. Here you'll analyze a critical approach to a story, and you'll use that critical approach to construct your interpretation of that piece of literature. Now, how do you find your critical approach? Well, this is why you are going to have to use sources to help sort of build and construct your interpretation to the literature. So as you read the assignment sheet for this paper, you'll notice that you must have a works cited page for this paper, and you must have 3 sources. One of these sources can be the actual text that you are using, but you also need to have 2 sources that discuss the author or the fiction that's in question. And these resources must be scholarly and academic sources. So, when I want you to think back to your Composition 2 class when you had this discussion on identifying scholarly sources versus sources that may not be as credible or what we like to call as popular sources. So for instance, you want to stay away from .com websites. You want to stick to .edu websites. You don't want to go to Google to search or to just find articles, but rather you want to use Delta College's library or your homes or your university library to find sources. So what I've done in e-learning is that I've put up two links. One link describes how to find scholarly and academic sources, and the other link directs you to the sources that are available to you at Delta College's website. Now, when I say that you don't want to use Google, that doesn't mean you want to completely stay away from Google. But as you're finding academic and scholarly sources, you do not want to rely on Google. Rather, you want to use Google Scholar. So you might find it more beneficial to, for example, if you're doing your paper on Theodore Roethke, maybe going to Google Scholar and seeing what professional academics have written about Theodore Roethke. Find the title of that article and then go to Delta College's website, go to EBSCOhost to see if you can access that full article. That's the sort of way that I want you to sort of find these scholarly and academic sources. So when you write this literary analysis paper, the major thing that you want to be aware of is that you establish your thesis statement. This is your interpretation. This is how you see the author's work, the fiction, your interpretation, and how you are going to use evidence from not only the fiction, but also evidence from the scholarly sources that you're finding to support your thesis statement. Another thing that I've done for the e-learning for this week is that I've uploaded a sample student essay from a past class. Now this student wrote about Zora Neale Hurston and the Gilded Six Bits. Now, I'm not saying that this is a perfect paper, but this is pretty much what I'm looking for. Notice how the student establishes their point of view, and they use not only evidence from the short story, but they also use evidence from scholarly and academic sources to support their point. The final thing that I want you to be aware of this week is the discussion board. Now, this week's discussion board, I want you to choose a piece of fiction from either Theodore Roethke, Toni Morrison, or Flannery O'Connor, and I want you to get your feet wet in looking for academic and scholarly sources about one of these three authors. So your task for the discussion board for this week is to choose an author and the reading that's on the course activities. So for instance, you might choose Toni Morrison's Recitative. And then I want you to find a scholarly article or an academic article on Toni Morrison's Recitative, and then I want you to report your findings. You'll notice that as you do background reading and scholarly research on these stories, that it'll help develop your understanding and it'll help develop your interpretation of the story. So when we think about this idea of literary analysis becomes this recursive process in which we're going back and forth from reading and writing to reading and writing some more. So you might find that you will help expand your understanding of the story after you read that scholarly article, and then it's your task to go back and take some notes about what you've read, and then go back and read it, and you might have to go back and read that short story again. The more and more you reread these short stories, and the more and more you reread the poems, and the more and more you read the secondary material that helps supports other writers' interpretations, the better understanding you'll have, and the better understanding you'll have about your writer of choice for your final paper, and the easier it'll be to write your paper. So, again, keep in mind some of the major points of postmodernism. I will upload that YouTube clip, and it's only a 4-minute clip that talks about postmodernism. Make sure that you read the assignment sheet for the literary analysis very carefully. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I will be in and out of the discussion boards this week. Another thing is that I also want to remind you to turn in your papers for paper number 2 on Friday. For those of you that have turned in your papers early, I am working on those, and I hope to have those finished by tomorrow. So again, Email me, post a discussion board if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I will see you in cyberspace.